Hello everyone, my name is Smith of Life and this is the second deck spotlight of an Infinity Wars classic deck. This time around we will be looking at CultOfVerore and SleepersOfAvarrach deck called Zombie Factory. Unlike our previous subject, this is mostly a control deck with a strong focus on command zone to fuel its strategy, which is to it Nero, Crypt Dweller, Rita, Mistress of Shadow, and Aleta, Immortal Sufferer. The command zone forms the focus of the deck's offensive strategy by providing steady source of recurring characters that can be thrown at the opponent or used to block his attackers. In service of that goal, we can use Rita's ability to create Rita's Guard, who then can serve as a cheap blockers or as the fuel for the abilities of Nero, which creates Reason of Avarrach whenever he buffs himself by +2/+2. And finally, Aleta can dispose of the remains by removing them from our graveyard and spawning a 4/4 undead token. A 4/4 undead token that can then be killed by Nero to spawn more reason in our graveyard and then disposed of by Aleta. Recycling is a serious business in Zombie Factory. As we have just established, our goal is to kill multiple characters with Nero to fill our graveyard with Reason of Avarrach, whose special ability is to return from graveyard to play after 3 turns. It is slow snowballing strategy. Once a good number of reason is created, they can rotate almost every turn, providing a steady board presence. Reaching the critical mass of them is the first big challenge the deck faces. To the end of giving us the shot at achieving the above, the deck runs pretty heavy control package. Lightning Blast, Overcharged Bolt, Death Ray, and Infest provides spot removal for the more dangerous cards that enemy can play. Overcharged Storm and Mass Death provide mass removal against the decks that play for a wide board present. It is notable that our own mass removal does not hurt us too badly because killing our own characters, especially tokens, will create more Reason of Avarrach in our graveyard. Next part of the deck is composed of the cards that synergize with the graveyard recurrent plan. Most important, Decrepit Crystal, which can make Reason of Avarrach a more threatening card by supplanting it with much needed stat buff, especially if you can stack 2 or 3 Decrepit Crystals. The Last Sleeper and Recurring Nightmare are also recipients of the Decrepit Crystal buffs, and thanks to their ability to return from graveyard, can serve as fuel for Nero to create even more Reason of Avarrach. Finally, Feast on the Dead serves to save us from committing a moral suicide by killing our own characters too often and too easily. The remaining cards are mostly tech or luxury choices and can easily be swapped out. Concealed Infection is mostly used for fuel for our overcharge cards, and could be easily swapped for something like Verore Kidnapper, who would provide us with more ways to deal with enemies resistant to kill effects. But it also provides decent benefits when played with large board of Reason of Avarrach against big blockers, ensuring 1-for-1 trades and helping us to push for little. And finally, Voracious Goliath is our backup plan in case the Reason strategy gets disrupted. It's the big hitter card of choice as a payoff for trying to gain control of the game. Calamity is the panic button of the deck, and we are reasonably resistant to it, because if there are at least some reason in the graveyard, they will not be affected by the removal. Now, let's try to get into the game. And we are finding ourselves in a game against NFR. Let's see. Triple Flame Dawn signifies an aggressive deck, and it seems that our opponent is... No, it is not a starter deck. Well, luckily we have a Lightning Blast in hand. We would have liked to play Rita's ability on turn 1, but given the danger that Claw makes, it makes lots of sense to spend our turn 1 by removing him from the board. We have established in our previous video that Claw, if unanswered, can become a thorn in the side, and our opponent does not seem to be able to run anything that would prevent Lightning Blast from killing him, which is probably the biggest weakness of Claw in the Triple Flame Dawn setup. And there we go. We are on a good way towards winning. Here's our backup Nero. He won't be seeing play just yet. We are floating one resource, but providing us with our first card for sacrifice and for turning into a zombie will be much use. Well, we now face the choice of either stopping the aggression with Rita's Guard as a champ blocker, or by responding with one of our spot removals. It would be an upwards trade for the opponent, turning 2 mana Knight of the Flame Dawn for a Death Ray, so for now, I guess we will continue rather passive line of play, trying to slow down enemy's aggression and find the time to start spinning our graveyard strategy. Well, turns out it was irrelevant anyway, but now we can start recycling the Rita's Gods. We are probably expecting enemy to drop his Bromwich. It is a little bit of a read on our part to see whether he plays him. Yep. Thanks to a correct read, we can remove Bromwich with Infest and create a 6/4 Risen of Avarrach. We stop 7 points of damage, and now we can continue. We don't have Overcharged Storm to mass remove the board as is, but we can do some control while creating more Rita's Guards, creating more zombies, and setting the zombies to die by Nero. The opponent expected some sort of mass removal. It is a shame we did not get a chance to remove our zombie. At this point, it is probably an okay idea to see about mass death. If the opponent dodges it, we are slightly behind, but If they don't, we are safely defended, and even killing these three characters is not a big issue, because it will allow us to create more reason in our graveyard. Ah, good. Having characters in our defense zone made the enemy think we wouldn't remove them. And we are on our way to get the control of the game. We can continue on our merry way. Matter Golem is a little bit of a problem because he will probably remain in support zone where we can't easily control it. So we will shuffle back one of the concealed infections, looking for some answer. Meanwhile, if something comes up, we are probably going to use Death Ray and Overcharged Bolt to try and keep ourselves alive. Well, that's an unexpected card. Quite a bit of burst from our opponent. We will answer with the Death Ray. We can use Zombie for protection, while... No, we will use Rita's Guard as a champ blocker while killing the zombie. The reason for that choice is that Zombie's morale cost is lower than Rita's Guard. Though, in the longer run, it will be immaterial given that both are expected to die. Okay, let's see what is Mr. Opponent going to do. And looking at Mr. Opponent's state, it seems that we have a good chance to achieve morale victory before traditional one, which is not unusual for heavy removal decks, especially when Mr. Opponent plays cards that do have quite steep morale cost. Well, that was definitely unpleasant. Well, let's see if we can bait the opponent to play some more, and if not, we can double the amount of Risen of Avarrach we have, and then probably use Nero for defense, given that by that point he will have grown quite a bit in stats. And if the opponent becomes baited, it will get us closer to our morale plan. Well, that did not happen, sadly. But by this point, Nero should hopefully be big enough to protect us while setting up further plays. It is quite possible that by playing Mass Death rather than boosting our resources last turn, we made a mistake by denying ourselves the ability to play Calamity. We are now looking at a rather risky playline, But there is non-zero chance that we will be able to stabilize here. And if not, it will be a well-played game on the opponent's part, and our fault for playing too greedily. Very well. We have a number of bodies that might be enough to let us survive this turn and use the amount of resources next turn to try and play Calamity and bank on the Risen of Avarrach returning from the grave to get us through. Okay, do we survive? We survive, though barely. Then again, we now have an amount of SleepersOfAvarrach on the board that would be simply a shame to throw away. So let's continue our plan with Nero, while trying to reduce enemies' damage a little bit. Given that the opponent is playing the triple flame down deck, Calamity plan has the detriment of not guaranteeing our survival given the amount of charged characters that this faction has at its disposal. Even something like another Agent Coil Firestarter could be incredibly detrimental to our chances of survival, while Nero the Crypt Dweller might put out some pressure right now. And let's see if our play paid off. Well, the opponent expected some mass removal on our part. It is a little bit of shame, but thankfully our new Risen of Avarrach are coming up. We can keep characters back as blockers while we continue to play. Also, we can do something a little bit cheeky and resurrect opponent's claw, giving them the same effect as Risen of Avarrach, except on our side of the board. And let's continue creating more undead. And let's shuffle our Reason a little bit. Just in the sake they become targeted by some sort of flashbang grenade or another spell which might move them around or, god forbid, exhaust them. Well, red tape puts our Nero back into the safety. And we are now cooking with gas. We can start to slowly whittle down the opponent, while keeping a large number of Risen of Avarrach in our grave, in our defense zone, just in case the opponent plans something. We can even afford to remove one Feast of the Dead in order to try and kill some of opponent characters, just to make potential morale victory quicker. Despite falling very low on health, due to the opponent's aggression, the fact that we managed to remove so much morale from them also puts very much pressure on them not to attack unless they guarantee hit. Which would probably mean that they will be looking towards cards like Nyx to try and get through our defense. Possibly if they play another Claw, they might look to try and use his unblockable ability. And of course there are always a couple of characters with flying, which could get them through. With the amount of bodies that we do have in our defense zone, I think that unless Mr. Opponent plays something very unexpected, our victory is probably rather secure by this point. Interesting choice of playing Zuza on the opponent's part, but thankfully we play wide enough that it does not disturb us overmuch, especially since we have just won thanks to a very large buff of Nero's attack. This game shows the basic strategy of stalling until we get enough of Reason of Avarrach to outpressure our opponent. Let's see if we can find another matchup. And here we are, finding ourselves in game against SRN 347, who is playing an interesting looking command of 2 GI and 1 CultOfVerore, with Nova the Mind Reader as a commander, which is something of a meme choice. Let's see where Mr. Opponent goes with that play. Since nothing in the command zone screams aggression to us, we can afford to start by pressing Rita's ability and ending our turn. Opponent playing the mechanism suggests some kind of artifact deck, which still leaves us with questions of what exactly is the plan regarding the Nova. We will move our Nero to the side just so he gets tossed away. In the colors that opponent's running, we are unlikely to run into a control. Into a command zone control, I should say. Well, luckily for us, Lightning Blast is cheap enough to deal with the threat. And while it always hurts to spend the removal on Lil Timmybot, the amount of buffs it received warrants at least some caution. And we will continue to create tokens that we can then turn into Reason of Avarrach. Well, Mr. Opponent's deck is quite strange, and looking at his level he might be a newer player, which would explain a somewhat unclear strategy. Then again, it might be considered a Tigris play, because he is buffing the infected tokens. I suppose we will take a sort of greedy line and kill our tokens with Nero's ability, while tanking some of the damage. While it's not optimal to do that, in 2 turns we can try to put Mass Death down, which hopefully will stop enemy aggression in its tracks. It is a greedy line to develop the Decrepit Crystal right now, but if we are lucky and Mr. Opponent plays a Splitter Robot to the front of attack zone, we might get away with it. And if not, it is not the end of the world. We are expecting to play it a little bit close. Mr. Opponent is not being very considerate, playing the... Okay, so it is some kind of a token spam deck. And Mr. Opponent is playing a little bit aggressive, so let's see if we can get some good mass death out of it. And if it happens that we only kill our undead, we can drop second mass death. It is a little bit inefficient, but we do have recycles in our deck, and 10 back-to-back mass deaths are rarely predicted by opponents. And it turns it was a value mass death for us. And we will indeed continue creating more and more Rhythm of Avarrach with another mass death. And Mr. Opponent will know that we are drawing a Death Ray thanks to his Nova, but we have also managed to start creating a little bit of a snowball. Then again, Mr. Opponent is doing similar with his mechanism. At this point in time, I think we will start using Nero defensively. And since we have Concealed Infection in hand, it is slightly less valuable for us than our backup Nero. Let's continue recycling with Aleta and pumping out more Rhythm of Avarrach. Mr. Opponent might hold some cards back, or even play his own Death Ray on our Nero. If that happens, it would be a shame, but this is also why we run backups. Since we played Nero from Command Zone, Mr. Opponent presumably did not expect to see him right now. But this is probably the junction at which Mr. Opponent would play Death Ray on our Nero. So instead, we will play Overcharged Storm to try and remove his tokens, and we do not mind killing our wounded tokens. It is a little bit of a question what we want to sacrifice to overcharge. We might get away with overcharging Death Ray, because that way Mr. Opponent might not expect us to hold another one in hand, and we will overcharge Feast of the Dead. We are still reasonably high on morale and our graveyard is not that full yet. We can then recycle more of the undead tokens, and we do have some mana left over, so we will actually use it to kill our board ourselves, to buff Nero, and still get the Risen of Avarrach in our grave. Let's see what happens. And as we predicted, opponent did try to kill Nero with the stolen Death Ray. Well, we ended up killing him ourselves because I forgot that the Overcharged Storm will bring him back. Unfortunate, but we can live with that. We have a decent amount of Reason already deployed. It's sad for us that Securitron will keep creating copies, but we might be able to get through it with enough champ blockers. And since we have spare resources, we can afford to draw a card. And once again, we have dealt much heavier morale losses to the opponent than the health losses, but this will change right now with the amount of Reason that we are starting to play. And just like that, in a single turn we have dealt 60 damage, only with our Risen of Avarrach. And to ensure that we get to deal little, we can do a little cheeky play. It is probably somewhat of a risk, but with the amount of characters the opponent has, if we overcharged all cards in our hand, chances are good that the opponent will be left with no blockers against our Risen. Let's see if our risky play pays off. Oh, we forgot that the opponent was running his own CultOfVerore and that he stole it with Nova. Well, that is very painful development. But luckily for us, we are playing Risen of Avarrach deck. Our creatures tend to come back and back and back for more, which is a part of deck strategy which makes it so resilient. And we do have some of removal still in hand. We can see if Mr. Opponent tries to block with his own Voracious Goliath. It would not stand to the amount of Reason we have at our disposal, but still murdering it is going to be satisfying. And there we go. We have enough damage for little. And despite being a weird choice, Nova actually paid off for Mr. Opponent. Not enough to prevent our victory, but enough to frustrate us.